Welcome to the Conscious Living Podcast, conversations to educate, empower, and enlighten our world. An uplifting and inspiring series of conversations and talks with your host, Jackie Woodside. We are educating minds, empowering lives, and enlightening souls to create a world where love prevails. In this engaging podcast, we deliver exciting, positive, transformative talks and teachings designed to elevate your life. Now, let's join our host, Jackie Woodside, for this week's session.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for another episode of the Conscious Living Podcast, where we are here to educate, empower, and enlighten our world. So I just want to thank you and recognize you as being one of the people that is committed to conscious living. And I'm just so grateful to know that there's an enormous movement out there of people saying to themselves, you know, the way we've been living and working isn't working. So today we're going to dive into that topic from the perspective perhaps of working and talk a little bit more about happiness at work, which I think is just, and beyond happiness at work, for me, I love what I do, and really have not had a job in, I don't know, probably about 30 years. So I don't really think about my life at work, but I know that many of you do. You're going to a workplace every day. Post-pandemic, less of you, and maybe it's not every day. But this whole topic of who am I and what is my experience of my work life is so critically important. So I'm happy to bring today to the Conscious Living Podcast my friend and colleague, Sunny Grosso, who is just this enormous blend of kind of cultural maven, travels about the world, a global speaker. She's the founder of SunYoga, and she's also worked for many years as an organizational consultant in workplace transformation. She worked with companies all around the globe, from Japan to Kazakhstan, worked with companies from Fast Company and Good to Great. So, big brands, small brands, she has really done it all. And her message in working with companies stems from the notion that happier employees make better employees, more productive employees. So that's how she has become known as kind of a workplace guru of how to create productive, happy, engaged workplaces. So Sunny, thank you so much for being with us. She hails from San Francisco, California at this phase in her life, and also travels the globe extensively. So Sunny, welcome to the Conscious Living Podcast. You mind saying a little bit more about yourself so our listeners can get to know you?
Thank you, Jackie. It's so good to be here after listening to many of these. Yeah, well, that was a great summary. I was personally very interested in happiness from the time I was young, because I came from a family that didn't understand how to thrive.
Yeah.
So it became sort of my mission to get that, to get more acquainted with what it means to thrive just on a feeling basis. And then I started studying it, and it kind of fell into my lap, this path. But the idea that we can make our lives happier through work was very appealing to me, because many of us have had those work experiences where, we just couldn't believe how soul-sucking they can be at times. So my mission became to transform that, and it sort of crept up on me, I think, like a lot of missions do. But since then, I've been doing this for nearly 15 years. I've been through 30 countries.
Wow.
I've worked with about 300 companies. And what we see is that, well-being, now to take it beyond happiness, which is the emotion, but into a more holistic sense of our overall human well-being, has come onto the radar in a really impressive way. So we're ready to ask deeper questions of it and to take real steps, not just dip our toes in the waters of curiosity. And so I think it's a fascinating time to be here.
That's so great. I want to go back a little bit more about how you got into this space, because I do find it really fascinating. You met and were working with the man, I forget his name now, who started Zappos, and some of his colleagues. Yeah, what's his name?
Tony Hsieh?
Tony Hsieh, is that his last name? Yeah. Tony Hsieh, who was the founder of Zappos, and his colleague Jen Lin, and her brother James. So you were working with these people who had the notion of kind of using the positive psychology model and bringing it into business. So say a little bit more about kind of the early roots of how delivering happiness came to be.
Yeah, well, for a long time, business was business as usual. It was about shareholder returns and, ROI. And along came Tony, and Jen was consulting for them, and then later on her brother James. And, Tony's sort of business model was a humanistic one, way ahead of its time, where he said, hey, we all kind of want to be happy. What if instead of utilizing a traditional business model, our model became to make our employees happy? And then they would just automatically, inherently deliver better results. Our business productivity would go up and even a customer service. So he tested that, iterated that. Jenlyn was a consultant in that company, and later on her brother James as well. And it took off. So now Zappos is studied in, MBA programs and around the world for that model of business.
Oh, great. And if you could just summarize, what are some of the key elements that they drew on with Zappos? How does a company focus on making employees happier or bringing greater happiness into the workplace? What are some?
Yeah. There's a whole science of our happiness, and it's not that new either. So it's been around for closing on 30 years. Yeah. And there's a subfield. The positive psychology is the overall field, and science of happiness is the subfield here. So there are some major pieces that we need in order to be happy and thriving in our lives. And then there are pieces that are more like your own puzzle to put together. So, for example, we need a sense of meaning and purpose. We are inherently purpose driven, meaning making machines. We also need to feel a sense of authenticity in our values and who we are. If we're surrounded by people who are doing things we disagree with all the time, it's going to be incredibly hard to be happy.
Right.
Yes, lots of other pieces in there in that puzzle that are things like a sense of autonomy, a sense of growth, development, progress, but also connection and belonging, gratitude, even mindfulness. And one way to think about these, and this was, part of Tony's message before he passed on, was to think about these as sort of a greenhouse. And I like to kind of translate that to this is your garden. So we can all be gardeners of our own happiness or well-being. So it's not about the tallest tree, if you think of gardening at work, but it's about growing each bush, rose bush or tree to its own beautiful expression of itself. But the key to that is that we have to take care of our own gardens in order to be able to create that garden for others. So there's an Arabic saying that the rain is the same everywhere, but it grows thorns in the valley and it grows flowers in the garden. So we have to kind of look at these pieces of well-being and really assess what's going to be most meaningful and important in our own lives. So it takes a little bit of awareness and inner work, consciousness.
Nice. I love that. And I love that workplaces now are embracing that. You talk about the notion of whole being as a part of well-being, and you bring whole being, well-being to work. So I'd love to dive into that notion, whole being, well-being at work. What does it mean, and how do companies go about it? And a third question, not so many questions at the same time, but they're all in my head, so I'll throw them at you. And the third one is, if you're not the owner of the company, if you're not the CEO or the COO, the person leading the company, how do you, as kind of the guy or gal in middle management, or maybe even below that, how do you make a happier cultural context at work when you're not the one setting the tone? So let's dive in on all of those.
Yeah. How do you grow your garden? So when we think about well-being, there's really many domains, and there's traditional models that will talk about these, but you have career well-being, you have community, you have social, financial, physical. Jackie, you and I are both strong in that department of the physical well-being.
Love
There's
it.
there's spiritual, there's emotional, there's mental. So we have all these sort of domains that we can look at and think, how well am I really, functioning in these domains of my life? But there is one that has the strongest overall impact on your holistic well-being.
Okay.
Do you have any guesses on that?
I think it's work. What I say to my client, well, let me tell you why I say that. What I say to my clients often is, you spend more time with your colleagues than you do with your family and close friends. So to
Mhm.
say that you're, oh, it's just work and it doesn't matter, it's no big deal, it's just my job, really doesn't make any sense. Because if you're spending that much time engaged in activities or with people that you don't care about, that are not aligned with your values and who you want to be, that will have a detrimental effect on your well-being. So that's been my stance as a coach and productivity leader and leadership coach.
Yeah, well, not surprisingly, you nailed it. We spend the most time of
Yeah.
any, single factor of our lives at work. So if you are thriving in your work, you are twice as likely to be thriving in your life. And
Yeah.
so this is where this kind of concept of whole being, well-being kind of comes in. And Tal Ben-Sahar actually coined the phrase whole.
Oh, I love that. His
Brilliant,
book,
right?
again, for
Yeah.
just because it's an unusual name, Tal Ben-Shahar, who's a professor at Harvard and teaches a course on happiness. He wrote a book called Happier. Can't remember the subtitle to it, but yes, I know his work well. And I didn't know he was the one who coined that phrase, whole being, well-being.
He just calls it whole being. I
Oh,
added the
okay.
well-being, but but if you think about, you as a human, Jackie, and all of you listeners out there, if you think about yourself for a moment, if you are thriving in life, it's good for you. You're going to live longer. You're going to have better relationships. Think about how important that can be with the most meaningful relationships. Just a 10% increase in the relationship with your spouse, for example, or your partner can mean a world of difference. You're healthier, you're more likely to succeed. But also, those all have an impact on how you show up at work. So you're going to have significantly less stress, anger, worry, loneliness in the workplace. And that's a huge sort of talking point right now. We're seeing
It is.
daily
Yeah.
loneliness at work is very high,
Yeah.
especially for fully remote teams.
Yeah.
All of this will translate into higher resilience and adaptability, and there's a flip side to this. So if we look at people who are not really thriving in their lives, yes, we have a whole host of physical, emotional, and mental issues, ailments, dis-ease. We experience a lot of trouble in our lives, but also we take those into the work domain. We're one being, so we flow and move between both these domains, all the domains of our lives. So we're going to be more burnt out, more stressed. We're going to feel more a sense of anxiety, daily worry is another very important statistic that has been come to light lately. And that means every day you're waking up and feeling stressed about something. And all of these add risk to the organization, and they equate to things like higher turnover, lower productivity, less engagement, of course. And overall, disengagement from work, which leads to like less ROI, right? Not what we want as a business owner. So our well-being, it's not just about, are you doing good at work? It is
Yeah.
about, are you doing well as a human being? And we're just starting to look at those numbers. For example, we know engagement is a big number that's out there. Globally, it's around 23, 24%. It's pretty stagnant.
Yep.
But if you're thriving in life, we can look at that as well. Now, that number globally is somewhere around 27%.
Oh,
But
wow.
yeah, so we're still not doing
No,
that great
really.
globally.
Yeah,
A little higher here.
low. That's really low. So just to go back on those numbers, so employee engagement, as you said, has been right around 23, 24%, and you said it's been stagnant. It has been at that level, plus or minus a few percentages for many, many years. And so
Mhm.
employee engagement, and by engagement, how that's been defined is people feeling like they're, actively feeling positive about their workplace, actively engaged in the work that they're doing, care about their work, care about their employees, versus those who are actively disengaged. They're probably looking for other work. They're probably saying negative things about the workplace, about the coworkers. And there's a continuum of actively engaged to actively disengaged. And I think it's 23% is either disengaged or actively disengaged. No, 23% are engaged, and the rest are either actively disengaged or disengaged. And
Yeah, you got
the
it.
global well-being scales, I didn't know this number. It's of our world feels that they're actually thriving on the global well-being scale. I read the global well-being report every year, and I look at the different countries, but I didn't realize it was that low. So it's only roughly 27% who feel that they're thriving.
Yeah, and as Americans, we may look at these numbers and say we can do better, and we do typically rise a little higher. But globally, those numbers are kind of shocking that we have the most technological and societal advances than we've ever had. Life is more
Right.
comfortable than ever. And
Right.
yet we're stuck at this low level of not really thriving.
That is so fascinating. And by thriving, I know there's factors like your physical well-being, emotional well-being, sense of satisfaction and happiness, satisfied with work. Am I missing any on the thriving scale?
It's not only the positive and negative effect are a couple of measurements, like how often do you feel positive emotions and negative, but also what's your outlook? Do you generally feel that your life is worthwhile and valuable? And so
Right.
you
Sense
put
of
all
meaning
that together.
Yeah. So, right. Meaning and purpose, optimism, engagement, connection, relationships. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. So we're not doing so well. So,
Right. And so if we look at these two kind of, almost seemingly separate entities, work and life, work-life balance we hear about all the time, work-life separation we hear about all the time, but that's not really true. They're more integrated than we know. They're a Venn diagram, right? They're
yeah.
overlapping.
Yeah.
So
That's actually the phrase I use, Sunny, is I use the phrase whole life integration rather than work-life balance.
I
Yeah.
love that.
I don't, when my son was young, I would, drop him off at school in the morning. I would work like 8:30 or 9 till 2:30. I'd pick him up, do my family evening with whatever, my son, homework and family time and dinner and whatnot. And he'd go to bed 8:30, and I would go back to work at, 8:30 and 9 o'clock at night, work till 11:30. And I'll tell you, it worked for me. I called it my second shift. That was when I developed this notion of whole life integration. Like, people be like, "Oh, what do you mean you're working at 9 o'clock at night?" I'm like, no, I mean, this is exactly what I want to do because I have commitments in both of these two very big domains of my life, of family and career. And so whole life integration, when you're mindful about what your values are and you schedule yourself accordingly, can be I think, a very powerful way to thrive in life.
Absolutely. And when we turn off work and say, I'm done with that, I need to set it aside and have time for my life, that's closer to a coping mechanism for work that has a tendency to sprawl or to take over too much mental or emotional space in our lives. It's hard to imagine that work can be a place that you enjoy enough that you actually integrate it and come back to it, but it can be that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that you look forward to work, that work, Freud said this, that work is the adult version of play. That is how we should feel going to work, being that our colleagues really should be our playmates. Our boss is kind of the headmaster at school, and we're just, we're just here to play and experience the joy of creation the way that young children do when they're using their imagination to, turn the merry-go-round into a pirate ship and, see the bad guys coming from the horizon. That's the imagination at work. And we can still tap into that initial creativity when we're clear that we're not the victims of the workplace, but we are the creators of our experience of work.
Absolutely. So we are really one being, and our well-being, it's about our whole being. It's about both of these domains. So let me ask you another question, another pop quiz, I guess. What percentage of people do you think are actually thriving in both domains, in their work domain and in the life domain?
Well, if our overall well-being is 27%, I would guess it's right around there, 25, 20%. I don't really know.
I love how optimistic you are.
I know.
You're thinking, yeah, as long as you're happy in your life, you'll be happy at work. It's about 9%. It's very.
Oh, wait, 9% of people feel like they're thriving at work? Is that?
And in their lives.
And in their life.
Both of those domains, that Venn diagram where it overlaps. Yes, I'm thriving in both. It's incredibly low. So that's what we have to change because they both affect each other so dramatically.
Well, of course. In fact, I say you don't have a personal life and a professional life. You have one life that God has given you, some of which you get paid for and some of which you do not.
Yes.
Exactly as you said, we are one being. So when you're that unhappy at work, of course, you're not going to go home and be like, oh, I'm going to pick up my happiness at the door.
Right. And I think it's hard for us also to refocus the lens a little bit and to think about where we begin. So, I mean, the truth is that nobody can make you happy. You can
Right.
set up the environment, you can give people all of the, psychological tools necessary. And it's very hard to do that because we are complex beings, so our happiness is not just as simple as ticking a few boxes. But even if you do that, it's a choice that you've got to make. And there's a lot of subconscious involved in that choice. There's a lot of programming and beliefs that are a part of that, ways we've protected ourselves over our entire lives. And this is where it kind of comes in that metaphor of being the gardener. So tending to your own garden, take a look around in your neighborhood. What do the gardens look like? Some of them are beautiful landscapes, where the roses grow, like that Arabic saying. And others, they get the same rain, the same sun, but they're full of thorns. So amazingly, we are not inherently self-centered, us humans. We are actually other-oriented. So self-care doesn't come naturally to a lot of us. It's something that we have to really kind of work on a little bit, is to take care of ourselves and our gardens and our own happiness and well-being. From that realization, we can think about, okay, once I do that, then I am set up to create a garden for my team. What about your family, your partner? And to really spread that so you have these ripples of impact.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I'm thinking about, this number of people being so dissatisfied at work and in their personal lives, and not only 9% are thriving in both. And it does make me recognize, I mean, this goes back to my whole passion around teaching people to live consciously. Because exactly as you just said, happiness is not an outside job. It is an inside job. And so for people to really recognize it is not up to my employer to make me happy, it's not up to my spouse to make me happy. What is it? Who am I? And what is it that my being, my soul, my life expression needs to be aligned with, so that happiness is the natural end result.
Mm-hmm. I
Right?
love how you're taking it there. And I know your life design course goes there too. And
Good.
I think something important to keep in mind is that, I recently heard that there's an update to the fight, flight, freeze. So we know we have a parasympathetic nervous system. This is the rest and digest. And then the sympathetic is the fight, flight, and sometimes overlooked freeze. But it's actually been updated to include please and appease. And that was sort of shocking to me, but it goes along very much with the science right now that it is actually dangerous for us, to the point that we feel threatened, that we need to please and appease others. But it puts us into this heightened state of awareness where it's like the fight and flight, where our system is sort of ramped up in order to be there. So what it says to me is that we have trouble just showing up as ourselves authentically,
Wow.
uncovering who that is, who we are, living according to our values and to our own truths. Sounds simple, but in a world that's constantly projecting images of what success is, what right and wrong is, it's a big part of our happiness.
Wow, that I'm so glad you brought that in. I love it when we, embrace new territory. I had not heard that, of the fight, flight, freeze, please and appease,
Right.
that we are kind of thrown to, an automatic response is don't rock the boat, don't upset other people.
Mhm.
What is it that they're looking for me to do? And you're right, my life design course, as you mentioned, is all about people living their life from the inside out based on who you came here to be. And that is so contrary to how our world lives. That maybe, even people hearing that right now, living life from the inside out, what does that even mean? And then based on who you came here to be, which is aligning your sense with your higher sense of purpose, your higher sense of meaning, what gives your life meaning. For some people, it's being a mom and raising a family. And for other people, it's starting a company and bringing in new technologies. And for other people, it's building a workforce, creating a company. There's no right way, but when what you're doing isn't aligned with who you are, I do believe, I guess, that I call it your energetic soul print. There's an energetic soul print that you've come into this world to deliver. And when you're not aligned with that, and it's not always through work, not everybody feels their highest self-expression is through a career. Some people it is through being a community member or being a family member, and the job just supports that. That's totally fine. That's totally
Yeah.
fine. Yeah.
You
Did you want to hop in?
Oh, yeah, we could go on forever. Yeah, there's highs and lows in our lives. And, there's also this sort of new field of positive psychology, which I call positive psychology 2.0, which is all about negative emotions and the role that they have in our lives. And I think you're touching on getting real with who we are. And it requires often a clear look at some of the tough stuff what happens when a negative emotion comes? Get it away. Let me avoid it. Let me get out of that emotion and sweep it under the carpet. Those are our instincts. And yet they're a part of life. So this new sort of field of positive psychology says positive psychology includes the quote unquote negative experiences, and that we actually really need these to grow and to thrive. We deteriorate without some form of resistance on us. Like think
Mhm.
of think of that person who has it all, except for a strong sense of who they are or a strong sense of fulfillment in their lives.
Yeah.
They've been given everything except those, right?
That's
So,
been the majority of my coaching clients. Super
oh,
successful people, millionaires, billionaires, big business owners, got the house, got the wife, got the yacht, got, the community recognition. But
yeah,
what's this all for? What's the
yeah.
point of it all?
So we deteriorate really without some adversity in our lives. And so what I think one of the things that we can take from this is that we really need to learn to embrace our highs and our lows. And it's the low points in life that we learn the most from. If we can stick with them, if we kind of go into them, sometimes we're afraid to look that negative or difficult emotion right in the face because it'll look back at us. We're going to magnify it. But the truth is that it gives us power over it if we can stay there. So by embracing these highs and lows, we can learn about who we are. And
Mhm.
really simply just by asking this question, what are some of my highs this week, today, this year? What were some of my lows? And what did I learn about myself? It's one of the most important things that we can do for our happiness.
That's a great paradigm. And it makes me think about your phrase, whole being, well-being, that well-being itself includes the highs and the lows. And, you're right. The diamond becomes a diamond through its experience in the rough. And the same is true for us. I am a big supporter of just embracing life as it is, accepting yourself, accepting life, accepting circumstances that you can't control. And yeah, of course, I have disempowering thoughts and emotions all the time. I just don't care that I have them.
Mm,
I don't give them any power
yeah,
uh, to define who I am. It's like, oh, there it is again. Oh, there it is again. It's the ego, the human condition. And I think the more people can be conscious of the fact that they're not their thoughts. I am not that thought,
right.
right? That thought or that emotion doesn't define me. It's an experience I'm having, but it doesn't define me. And the more people can, recognize that they don't have to be defined by those negative thoughts and emotions, I think the more freedom there is to really explore, if you will, the magic of life.
Right. And so what you're saying is so beautiful and courageous. Courage required.
Right?
So yeah, Carl Jung said the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are.
Yeah.
Great. So why isn't everybody themselves? Because
Right.
it does take a lot of courage and
Yeah.
fortitude. So what do you need to do that? And what do you need at work? So
Yeah.
if we sort of backfill people who are really courageous, who do believe in themselves, who, are able to achieve that sort of mentality. One thing that is being talked about a lot right now is this concept of psychological safety.
Yeah.
So do you feel that you're going to be punished or outcast somehow for saying what you really think or for being who you truly are? And so this concept has gotten a lot of talk lately,
Yeah.
which to me I think is a very good thing. It's a good flash in the pan. I hope that it keeps flashing for a while because we want to surround ourselves with leaders, with teams, with organizations where we can speak our minds and be ourselves, and
Yeah.
also friends and community. And that's equally important.
Yeah, absolutely. So whole being, well-being at work, the freedom to be yourself, to bring yourself to work, to take risks, to be authentic, lead with your authentic self, and to not be shunned or in some ways have a negative experience because of it. And, and when you do, the ability to bounce back, having that resilience. Because sure, not every wonderful idea that you think the company should listen to or the team should do is going to be met with applause and immediate approval. So it does take courage. It takes resilience. And it takes, this is why I'm so passionate. It takes being conscious of things are not always going to go my way, but it doesn't change the fact that if I focus on the externals, I will be chasing that carrot forever. When I locate my happiness, my well-being, my wholeness internally with knowing who I am at depth and then generating my life accordingly, I will have the keys to the kingdom forever.
I love that. And you brought up also, the idea of resilience and what we need. And, Kelly McGonigal has a great quote. She's a researcher, done a lot of great work, but she says that we have a built-in mechanism for resilience to stress, and that's human connection. One of the other really big categories right now that's also under a hot spotlight, I would say, since the Surgeon General came out last year and said that we're in an epidemic of loneliness. So we're really in this crisis of connection. DEIB brought out the importance of belonging, and they're closely related kind of cousins. So in order to have that resilience, we need to have connections. There's a great study that they did in the UK where they followed adult males for their whole lives. Unfortunately, they didn't follow women. It would have probably been better. But
of course,
what they determined is that they could actually predict if these men would be alive in 10 years based on the quality of their connections.
Their relationships. Yeah, I read a book about that. I'm not remembering the name of it right now. But it's like the one longevity factor. If you boil it all down, it was based on a longitudinal study out of Harvard, actually. The Harvard study. If you boil it all down to one thing, it is relationships. The quality of your relationships will determine the quality and the length of your life.
Yeah, and we've seen, I've been talking about this for a long time. So it was thrilling to see the Surgeon General come out and really ring the alarm on loneliness. It's increasing with the younger generations. It's increasing with fully remote workers. So we have to really keep our eye on it, but it doesn't mean that it has to. There are ways that you can experience connection remotely. So it just has a limit and different ones. We've got to get used to them and really sort of stress test how we can do that with virtual and remote teams. But over the years, we've seen the rates of loneliness back in the 80s. I did a little research on this. It was low. About 20% of people felt lonely overall, And at this point, it's 20% of people feel loneliness daily. And the actual number of people who feel lonely overall is way higher. It's around 66%. So it's continued to climb. It's just like a chart going up.
Absolutely. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground. Loneliness, thriving, resilience, well-being, whole being. These are super, super important topics. And just want to summarize for people, I guess, what we're saying here. And I'm curious to your summary as well. But, basically what we're saying is being well at work will help you be well in life. Bringing well-being to work, engagement at work, relationships at work does add to your overall life satisfaction. Your sense of well-being is really internally driven, despite whatever circumstances you might find yourself in. And being in relationship is one of the keys to thriving and living a happy, whole life. Anything you want to add to that, Sunny, or any last thoughts you want to share with our listeners?
We have to also, I think about making the invisible visible with our well-being. So there's a whole field of your subconscious that's working, as we mentioned it briefly earlier, but this is something that I've noticed people are more open to hearing about it since the pandemic. We all kind of had this like reset in the pandemic, and what's underneath the surface is going to direct your happiness and your well-being mightily. So we've got to have the courage to take a look in there and understand what really the workings are, on that conscious level that, you really talk about so beautifully.
Yeah, I love that. Make the invisible visible. And I guess that's kind of what I seek to do with the Conscious Living podcast. So thank you so much for being my guest, bringing your wisdom, your experience to this conversation. I so appreciate you. And I'm really looking forward to watching your career continue to evolve and bringing this, delivering happiness 2.0 to the workplace. So where can people get in touch with you, Sunny, if they want to talk with you further or explore these ideas for their workplace?
Yeah, and thank you for what you do, Jackie. You do make the invisible visible. SunnyGrosso.com.
Awesome. It's really great to be with you. So I just want to encourage our listeners to, take a step back after this podcast and take a moment to reflect. Are you focused on your inner world, and are you being responsible for making the invisible visible by creating a thriving life and bringing your greatness to the world? Thanks for being with us. Until next time.